Everything's good. Okay, great. So yes, if you have the 2021 Sidereal Astrology Guide, then none of this chaos that is happening in the world, and I am most certain that it's also happening in your life, is not any surprise to you. So if you go to May, this is really important. There are 2 times this year where we get 2 lunations. A lunation is merely a new moon or full moon back to back that are ruled by the same planet. So that means in the month of May, we had a new moon in Aries on May 11th, and then we have a full moon eclipse in Scorpio on May 26th. So we know if we go to our little planets table here, I'm sorry, the reading your sidereal birth chart meanings, we can see here that both of these 2 signs are ruled by Mars. So we had an Aries new moon that's all about being self-empowered. It's about what you feel capable of, is what you think you're capable of. We talk about the sun being exalted in Aries because the sun in Aries is literally about being able to use your fortitude, your will to subdue your mind and direct it towards your goal or the object or your ambition or whatever it may be. So now we're having a Scorpio full moon, which is also an eclipse. And this is about self-preservation, right? Self-preservation is literally about saving your life. And I really don't need to list all of the threats and all of the different things that are happening in the world that give us reason to feel like we are in danger, to perceive danger as a reality, and to be getting into community and brainstorming and using our imagination to figure out ways that we can save our own lives. Going to the back where we have these fill in the blanks. The fill in the blank for the full moon lunar eclipse in Scorpio says, speaking up to save my life. And that is because Mars, the planet that is in charge of Scorpio, is in Gemini. In the monthly summary, which I've posted like 50 different times on my Twitter at this point because it is so freaking relevant. It says, ultimately, language is both the descriptor and creator of identities. Language can determine what we even have the capacity to perceive. We've seen multiple people who are celebrities, public facing, big profiles, most notably Demi Lovato, coming out as non-binary. And I know that for some people who are not in communities where people feel free to express themselves authentically, this may be the first time that they hear those words. We assume that everyone's in our little Twitter bubble and they know about non-binary and NB and all the different ways people identify as queer. But for someone to be using the phrase non-binary as an identifier for themselves is really, really important. This is how language moves people out of invisibility and into spaces where they can feel the freedom and safety to be themselves. And so we see Demi Lovato speaking up to save her life. Why is it saving your life to name yourself properly? Why is it saving your life to choose the pronouns or the name that you answer to or want to be called? Obviously, this presupposes that there are only 2 genders and that there are only 2 expressions of gender. And just because we have only had the language for 2 genders in English does not mean that there are only 2 genders. This is why I say that ultimately language is the descriptor and creator of identities. Because once you get the language to articulate something, it allows you to take up space in the imagination of the culture and to literally say, I exist. I'm real. I'm here. You cannot erase me. You cannot force me to fit into whatever box that you want to put me in. We also see this as a reality in the Middle East, where we're talking about the names of states and the names of people and the kind of language that we use to describe what's actually going on and what's happening. And we see people in positions of power playing word games, that if they call it this, then we will perceive it as this. If we call it that, we will perceive it as that. If we call it colonization, we might perceive it as violence. But if we call it self-defense, we'll see it as righteous. And so in your personal life, What language is liberating you? What language are you using to speak up and save your own life? I wanted to, before I go to these cards, 2 announcements. First, I think that on Wednesday, the 26th, the actual day of the full moon and eclipse, I'm going to go on Clubhouse and offer some for donation or free sidereal astrology readings. Clubhouse is actually now available on Android. So no excuses, people. If you want to show up and get your free reading, then you know where to find me, People's Oracle on Clubhouse. So that's sometime probably Wednesday evening, the 26th. That's evening Central Time in the US or wherever Central Time is, because I think it's in Mexico too. And then the second thing is that I actually wanted to go through and just give some off the cuff horoscopes for this particular full moon for each sign. Okay, so we're going to start with Scorpio. Scorpio is all about being too different. And let me say this. This is for sidereal only. If you do not have your sidereal birth chart, you can easily go to thepeoplesoracle.com and click sidereal birth chart and use the instructions there to cast your sidereal birth chart. Make sure that you follow the instructions precisely, because if you make a mistake, for example, choosing the wrong house system, you will not only not be able to use the guide or any other content that I create, however, you won't be able to properly apply what I'm talking about here today, okay? So no intercepted houses. You should have 1 sign per house. You should be using the Lahiri Ayanamsha, so on and so forth. So when I call out a sign here, this is primarily applicable to your rising sign, so your sidereal rising sign. This is applicable to your moon sign. And if you have, let's say, 3 or more planets in that sign, you can also use this to apply to yourself. So you have up to 3 different signs you can be paying attention to today when I give you these horoscopes, okay? We're starting off with Scorpio. Scorpio is, especially Scorpio rising, is about being too different to hide, right? This is something about your personality, something about your name or your physical appearance, your demeanor, or whatever it may be that deviates from the norm or the status quo. You might be a big, strong black man that's 6'5". You might be someone who does not conform to the binary of gender. And so when people see you, they don't know what category to put you in, or they put you in a category that they think you belong in, and then that may not be actually how you perceive and identify yourself. For Scorpio, this full moon eclipse is, for everyone, this full moon eclipse is continuing something that began in the spring of 2020, right? I've talked about it at length in the 2021 Sidereal Astrology Guide, where the defining moment and event of the beginning of these eclipses in Scorpio and Taurus was the murder by the state of George Floyd and the subsequent rebellion and uprising that really spread all over the world and illuminated the plight and struggle of Black people in America, and also really gave us some solidarity with the struggles of people in other places in the world. We see it now where there's a lot of talk about really identifying with the struggle of the Palestinians and connecting it to the plight of people all over the world. So then this becomes not just about race or skin color or gender or state or whatever it may be. It becomes about the very oppressive structures, institutions, and power hierarchies that are responsible for violence against marginalized people all over the world. So for Scorpio rising, moon, and those who have significant placements in Scorpio, this is right in the kisser. This is really about you being challenged to step out of hiding. Oftentimes, Scorpio goes into alienation and isolation because to be authentic can bring violence, harm, and death. So for those with Scorpio, what does it look like for you to come out of hiding? What does it look like for you to find spaces where you can be yourself authentically? What kind of triggers emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually come up when you get a taste of this freedom? What old behaviors and habits are haunting you because you're so used to having to conceal your differences in order to survive and in order to be safe? Okay? Next, we have Sagittarius rising. Sagittarius rising, this is interesting. Now, if you have planets in your 12th house for Sagittarius rising, Sagittarius moon, or a stellium or group of planets in Sagittarius, if you actually have planets in Scorpio, this might hit a little bit differently because it would mean that this particular kind of configuration or relationship in your chart already exist. But Scorpio is the 12th house from Sagittarius. And Scorpio is really about boundaries. It is about self-preservation and the emotional boundaries. Where do you end and where do I begin? What is the subjective experience that I have of my body and myself in contrast to the expectations that we have to conform? So if Scorpio for Sagittarius rising is definitely talking about the ways that you are challenged to, or have been challenged to, betray yourself in order to have boundaries. How it might feel like your deepest convictions, your ways of wanting to conform the world to your beliefs, your political, spiritual beliefs, grading up against the difficult choices that you must make in order to survive. It's very easy, and I'm talking about myself, so just know that if I'm reading you, I'm reading myself too. Know that it's very easy to go out in the world and proclaim loudly these convictions, these moral convictions, this spiritual way of belief, this political doctrine, and all of these things. But at the end of the day, sometimes upholding your beliefs can put your life in danger, or it can keep you from accessing the very things that you need to feel safe and survive. So what difficult choices are you making, Sagittarius, where your deepest held political convictions rub up against the necessities of survival? We often want to hold people to a high standard and say, if you profess this and if you believe this, then you cannot do this. And for Sagittarius, we often hold ourselves to this standard. But at the same time, there comes a point where you have to decide, are you going to uphold your conviction or are you going to survive? And maybe you want to be a martyr. That's cool. No sweat, no shame, no nothing. It's no judgment, but understand that's the choice that often we find ourselves in when our political, moral, or spiritual convictions force us into making difficult choices. That we might have personal subjective feelings about things that aren't necessarily in alignment with what our professed convictions are. Let's move on to Capricorn. So Capricorn, moon, rising, or stellium, or significant placements in Capricorn. Scorpio is going to be given that 11th house topic for you, which is about your shared identities. It's about the people that you are in community with. It is about your alliances. It's about benefactors and helpful people. It is about making connections that are not necessarily rooted in familial bonds, but also that are not necessarily rooted in familial bonds, but in bonds of some other kind of shared identity. Wherever we have Scorpio in our birth chart, for anyone, even if you don't have planets there, everyone has Scorpio in their birth chart somewhere by house. So wherever in your birth chart you have Scorpio, this is where you're dealing with alienation and isolation and not fitting in of the violence that often comes from the fact of non-conforming, the choice to live out loud your authentic self. So in your peer group, in your social group, Capricorn, where are you confronting this decolonizing the survival instinct? Where are you maybe having the opportunity to live out loud or to profess or make public in some way your own stance on what's going on in the world, whether it has to do with the way that our conception of gender is expanding and changing in a collective sense, our conception of sexuality and the space that we make for people who are non-conforming. Where does this fit in your life? Understand that the opposing house is also in play here too, just because this is a full moon. So that means the Sun, Mercury, and Venus are still in Taurus at this particular full moon eclipse in Scorpio. So that 5th house of children, love, sex, pleasure, creativity, and I'm still talking about Capricorn. 11th house of other people's children, of, Capricorn rising moon, you might be having some custody issues or some child support issues that are coming up. And this is a long story, going on about how to rightly divide the labor of parenting, whose responsibility it is, but also bumping up against the cultural expectations of and norms of parenting based on gender, based on sexual identity, and based on race, right? What kind of problems do you confront in your parenting relationship because of genders, right? We all know that women are saddled with the emotional burden of parenting as well as the material and financial burden, and that men aren't punished in the same way that women are punished, you know, for the choices that they make in parenting. Again, once again, reading myself, but y'all are here for the read. You're here for the snatching of the wig, so y'all are with me. Let's move on. Next, we have Aquarius rising. Oh, Aquarius, friends. I know it's hard out here having a body. I know it's hard out here actually remembering that the body needs food, it needs water, it needs sleep, it needs touch, it needs connection, it needs love. Sometimes you need a caress, you need your back rub. But you can't even feel the needs if you're not in your body. Luckily for you, this Scorpio eclipse is highlighting all of the ways that your life experiences have forced you to dissociate from your own person and being, have forced you to erase yourself, to erase your own authentic identity, to be safe, to survive, right? This is not just an exercise, an intellectual exercise of what outfit do I want to put on today? Do I want to be queer today? Do I want to be black today? Maybe I want to be cis-het today, right? Now, some people do that because they find that safe place where they can be their queerest self, or they know that they have to try to pass for norm in other environments. So Aquarius, man, 10th house is a very public place of your chart. So this is inevitably having to do with your mother, right? Your own mother, your relationship with your mother and other significant women in your family group, and the ways that you may not conform to their expectations of who you are. Right? What about in your work with your bosses or your superiors? What are the ways that you're being confronted with the fact of your erasure? Erasure just literally means that you have internalized somebody else's perceptions of who you are and who you're supposed to be. That you cannot see yourself free from the gaze of someone else. Why? Not because you chose to be, but because their power and authority over you necessitated that you do that in order to survive. So I hope you see the theme here is that we are seeing ourselves and feeling our feelings and our bodies. We are getting into what we actually experience ourselves as, despite the containers and boxes and labels that society has forced us to fit into, again, for survival. I don't ever want to overlook the fact that passing is a viable, legitimate, and sometimes necessary survival tactic. That you can't be as non-white, non-straight, non-male as you really want to be, because if you really dig into the way you want to perform and embody femininity, regardless of your perceived or assigned gender, if you really want to dig and be into your blackness or your Mexicanness or your Palestinianness, that in order to do that, you know that you are giving up some form of safety. However, the theme of this full moon eclipse is speak up to save your life. Scorpio hides, Aquarius hides, you've got to survive. But Mars in Gemini has the bullhorn right in front of your mouth, the microphone ready to amplify your message. And we see this theme of the way that we are getting language to really understand the source of our suffering. And we're getting language to name and identify ourselves in a way that brings us out of invisibility and erasure. So Aquarius, what does it feel like to really be in your body? It's scary there, isn't it? Right? Because there's a lot of feelings that you can't control. And maybe you just don't even have experience being in your body. So you don't have experience to identify what's actually going on, or to put into proper perspective what's going on in your body. This is where language comes into play. Language creates worlds. The minute you get the word for something, it becomes real for you. You can objectify it. You can put it into proper perspective. You can value it correctly. Okay? Y'all are so funny. All y'all Aquarius over here talking about what body? I don't have a body. Feelings? I don't know what that is. Let's move on. We've got Pisces. Oh, Pisces. Pisces feels all the feels from all of the directions of all of the people that are inside the vicinity, and that can be really challenging. We see that space where in between two signs that are next to each other, they can be so different. Whereas Aquarius is objectifying the self, dissociating, detaching from, or disconnecting from the self. Pisces is immersing into all of the selves. Where do I end and where do you begin? Remember, as a survival strategy, Pisces has developed intangible knowing. That means the capacity to know without evidence, to feel as a way of knowing, where Gemini uses words. Sagittarius uses conviction or belief as a metric, context, or doctrine to measure themselves, other people, and their experiences against. Virgo measures and counts. Y'all heard me talking about my son, the Virgoing, always counting, always calculating, just for the hell of it, not even trying to get to an equation or solution. What was he counting yesterday? He was counting, okay, we got 5 pickles in here, and we got 5 pickles in here. The only way it's gonna be equal is if I eat the pickles on I'm like, sir, you can have all the pickles. Like, we don't have to go through the spreadsheet of how many pickles we got from the restaurant. Go ahead and have it. My whole point being here that Pisces really struggles to take their own bodies and feelings at face value, and always having to contextualize, again, for survival, their feelings into a larger, broader. Anything that's ruled by Jupiter, we're talking about Pisces or Sagittarius, means that you can't take this thing at face value. It looks like a book, but is it really a book? My stomach is growling, but am I actually hungry? I have a headache, but am I actually in pain, or is this signaling something to me about my environment? Is there some psychosomatic factor here that makes my body, which normally, if my stomach is growling, then I'm hungry. Or if I feel a certain sensation, it might be because I am, something going on in my body. But Pisces speaks to us about the fact that sometimes our feelings can alert us to things outside of ourselves and about other people. At this point, I really feel like we don't actually have individual bodies. The individualness of our bodies is an illusion. The way that just by being in close proximity to another person, our whole neural network is reacting and responding. There's been so many experiments where, I think one of the experiments was where they took 2 strangers and they let the strangers bond and get to know each other for a certain amount of time. And then they took one of the people into a room and flashed a light in that person's face. And the other person who did not get the light flashed in their face, their brain actually triggered off as if the light was being flashed in their face. If somebody can tell me where that experiment is, that would be really great, because I keep mentioning it and I would like to have some receipts so y'all know I'll be making stuff up. So Pisces, the boundaries thing is really hard. And this can be particularly challenging for you. Trines are not cool. Let me just tell y'all that first of all. I know that wherever astrology world y'all came from, they told you trines good, squares bad, oppositions worst. And that could not be further from the truth. Oftentimes, if we have an adaptive mechanism that's being illustrated by a particular placement in our chart, when that trine comes around, that trine is going to reinforce and encourage that adaptive mechanism, whether or not is it applicable, necessary, useful, or even beneficial at the present moment. So, Pisces, your work right now is to find the fine line of distinction in terms of putting emotions, feelings, sensations into proper perspective. Do the adaptive mechanisms that you've had up until this point in terms of how you interpret your own body and the perspective that you put your own feelings in. Is that applicable now? What language liberates you from codependent dynamics? Let's move on from Pisces to Aries. Oh, we're in your 8th house. Other people's money, death, shared resources, loss, benefits from death. I often say, I don't care what your rising sign is, or what your moon is. If you have planets in the 8th house, that means you have access to other people's money, whether or not you wanted. It can also mean that other people always have their hands in your pocket, whether or not you want them to. Now, the nature of the planet there is going to give more details as to whether this functions in a way that ultimately benefits you, whether it functions in a way that kind of undermines you, or in a way that's just like really difficult and challenging to live with. Everybody should be going back to May and June of 2020. This is where this story all began. Again, George Floyd rebellion, and even what's going on in Palestine. Even though this is a 60, 70 year occupation at this point, new life has come to it due to the previous administration, due to the actions of the previous administration, which likely probably timed perfectly with the eclipses of last year. I won't say that man's name, but he decided that he was going to acknowledge Israel as a state, which is something no other president had ever done before. He decided to go over into the Middle East and rub elbows with some countries to shore up this designation. I actually tweeted earlier this year in January, I said that once we got through the Mercury retrograde in Aquarius, Jupiter in Aquarius this year, we will be talking about not only what makes a person, but what makes a state a state. So we're having conversations about DC statehood. We're having conversations about Puerto Rico being an occupied territory. We're having conversations about Palestine and many other places where people have been stripped of personhood because their state has been stripped of statehood. And so because they are not acknowledged as a sovereign entity or group of people by others, they are stripped of human rights that would be rightly applied if we were to acknowledge their statehood, if we were to acknowledge their personhood. So for Aries, we've got your 8th house. This is a very uncomfortable place for you, Aries, because Aries is like, if I have the will, if I have the capacity to do this, I'm going to do it. And that 8th house is like at the expense of your life, at the expense of your interdependence and relationships with other people. Are other people relying on you materially in some way that intersects your survival with theirs? What about the ways in which your survival is against your will, without your consent or knowing, intertwined with the survival of other people, right? How are these themes coming to the fore at this time? I would say Mars is in the 3rd house of wherever we're talking about Aries rising, moon, or stellium. This inevitably might go back to family roles and dynamics, fictive kin, aunts, uncles, god, cousins, maybe your parents, grandparents. But there's some funny dynamics going on here with money, with your near relatives, and boundaries in terms of how your relations with those people either put you in danger or put other people in danger, right? Let's move on to Taurus. I think we're halfway through these horoscopes. What's my time looking like? 30 minutes. All right. I think I could do this in 15 minutes, and then we can do 15 minutes for the reading. Let's see if we can get it done. So we've got Taurus. Taurus is the funny one, the cute one, disarming people by making them laugh, pleasing appearance. I call Taurus the sign of passing. Don't judge passing as white, passing as straight, passing as whatever identity has access to power and safety in the world, right? Taurus passes. Taurus disarms people with their charm, with their personality, with their physical appearance. Taurus is able to get into institutions of power. They are able to navigate institutions with ease. Generally, they are able to be in positions that might actually exclude them based on their identity because for whatever reason they have conformed or appear to conform enough in order to make people not feel threatened by their difference. And so for Taurus, at some point, it gets painful to contort yourself into a pretzel and a box just so you can be accepted. Now, again, I have to keep reiterating this. We are talking about survival. So there's no judgment here. This is just a matter of whether your coping mechanism or your adaptive mechanism is still relevant and it's still reaching the goal that you needed to reach at this point in your life. How has passing for straight, being non-threatening to white people, embodying some kind of masculinity that gets you in the good graces of men, right? How have those things gotten you to where you are and where you want to be? How has your class, your access to capital and wealth, to education, to a certain group of power brokers in your field or in your community, how have those things allowed you to get into spaces that actually reject and marginalize you, your family, and the communities that you identify with? How are you being in those spaces, speaking up and out loud, not only to save yourself, but also the other people who are identifying as you? And finally, relationships for Taurus. Oh, Taurus, at some point, you got to get some boundaries. At some point, you save your life by not sweeping it under the rug, not, acting like everything is okay, smiling it all off. At some point, you got to stand up for yourself, because the pain of contorting yourself into shapes that harm you. There's this theme that comes up that when you have emotional or physical violence inflicted upon you because of your identities, and a valid and legitimate coping strategy is that you become your own oppressor. You internalize that violence. You might change your appearance, or you might erase your own emotional reality and truth in order to survive. And so you're caught in this difficult space of, do I subject myself to the violence of the state, the violence of my community, my family, my partner, if I dare to live authentically and out loud? Or do I inflict the violence upon myself in order to survive? We've got Gemini. Oh, Gemini. We got another air sign here. It's like, where's your body, man? Did you eat today, Gemini? Did you eat? Did you eat yesterday? Have you drank enough water? Have you? Are you sure? Are you sure? Not just yesterday. Do you drink enough water every day? Maybe what you're feeling is because you haven't slept. Maybe you should sleep. That would be really nice. Get yourself some melatonin, get yourself a little bit of, nighttime routine, turn off the lights, your devices, take you some valerian root, some chamomile, get some meditation on, and get yourself on a routine. For Gemini rising and moon especially, it can be so hard to really acknowledge and feel your body. All air signs, Libra, Gemini, Aquarius, all suffer from erasure and invisibility in some way. For Aquarius, this is really about your identity, who you are. Are you seen? Are you validated? Are you recognized? Or are you erased and made irrelevant? Are you seen as human, as a person? For Gemini, this is about being believed, right? This is about truth. This is about trusting your own perceptions. For Gemini, this can come off as being very curious, right? Just kind of living in a state or being in a state where you cannot trust your immediate knowing or your intuition or your instinct or your body or your thoughts or your eyes or your ears. And so the natural disposition or coping mechanism is to approach everything as if you don't know. And so you ask a lot of questions, which is cool. But at some point, you got to get into your body. And for Gemini specifically, in terms of health issues, this is really a time where these can be difficult for you. Health issues, but also work, right? So speaking up to save your life may mean getting a proper diagnosis for what has been ailing you in your health. It might mean that you need to sever from one job and find another job. It might mean that you begin a new course of herbs or a new drug or prescription medication because you've gotten a new diagnosis or just awareness of what has been plaguing and ailing you. Oh, we're so close. Where are we? Cancer. Ooh, we're so close. Okay. Cancer, another water sign. Another place where I know they told y'all that trines were good. And I'm here to tell you, no, they're not. Sorry. They're not. They're not. They're good and like, yeah, you know, it might be able to get you what you want, but familiarity and reinforcement is not always good. You understand what I'm saying? It's not always good. Now, Cancer, we're in the 5th house. We're talking about your sexuality. We're talking about pleasure. We're talking about love. And this is a really tough one because when we're dealing with Scorpio in the 5th house, again, we're forced to, I mean, for everybody's, wherever Scorpio is, right? We're forced to make these really difficult choices where the 5th house is about love and it's about sex and pleasure and creativity and art and music. You might be working out, going to the gym, dancing, yoga, you know, cooking even. But at the same time, there are often other things going on that make ease, that make pleasure and joy and love not accessible at the time. And you have to make these choices about what you're going to prioritize in terms of this area in your life. So we're also talking about children again. They may not be your children. They may be children you work at your job with. They may be your friends' kids, other people's kids, whatever it may be. But again, forcing us into these difficult places where we really have to make a choice about what we're going to prioritize, and we have to deal with the consequences of what we're going to prioritize. Again, if you're creative and you're Cancer moon rising or significant group of planets in Cancer, what about your creative practice? What about your art is bringing you to this place where you're confronting race in a new way, where you're confronting the power dynamics of gender and sexuality, where you're confronting the power dynamics of class and wealth and capitalism? How is that showing up for you? And with children, if you have any, how are you making these difficult choices to preserve your own life or to preserve your child's life, right? Let us move on to Leo. Ooh, we're so close to being done. Leo. Oh, Leo. Oh, Leo. Oh, Leo. If I were to pick a sign that has probably had the most difficult time over the past, I would say about 5 years, it would be Leo. Leo is to me the sign that has gotten the worst of the astrology over the past few years. Yeah, you had some cool stuff going on in your 5th house, and for a lot of my clients, that represented this larger new awareness around gender and sexuality, and people were exploring and discovering their sexuality and gender identities and what felt good to them in new relationships, and maybe they were discovering or exploring polyamory or non-monogamous forms of relationships. But you have some other stuff going on now in your 4th house. This is with your parents. This is with home. This is with the very foundation of your life, the foundational relationships of your life, which are about parents. Leo struggles because this really is the sign of patriarchy, right? This is the sign that those people are forced to contend in ways that others may not be, with the way that we automatically attribute good intentions, leadership capability, and an entitlement to authority to people who present or identify or are as seen as male or men. So people who have Leo have been dealing with this their whole lives. And so the collective conversation about patriarchy, about men in positions of power, about the way patriarchy has shaped society, violence against, non-men, all of that stuff. Leo has dealt with this. I got to pause here because I know some of y'all are just coming in, and I need you to know that this is not for your tropical chart. If you do not know what a sidereal chart is, if you have not seen your sidereal chart, you should pause because you're going to be very, very, very confused. You should go to thepeoplesoracle.com, click sidereal birth chart, and follow the instructions there so that you can make sure that you are using the appropriate chart. Again, all of the horoscopes that I am giving right now apply for your rising sign and your moon sign. And if I say a sign that you have some significant placements in, It can be a conjunction of 2 planets, 3 planets, whatever. You might find some things relevant for you there, okay? So Leo, yes, you've been going through it, but there is something real here about the way you confront the power and authority of other people in your life when you feel feelings that they don't approve of, when your differences are too loud. Leo really struggles because they take everything and everyone in their environment as making a statement about them. Taurus can do this too, right? If you are betraying what the power Taurus perceives themselves to have in a patriarchal, capitalist, racist society, they're going to take it really personal, right? And so the same goes for Leo. How have you struggled to be authentic to yourself, to your safety, to your self-preservation in the face of men and the powers, larger, broader power structure of men who have claimed authority over you? Sometimes you have to hold your differences in. Sometimes you have to conceal them. Sometimes you can't even perceive your own differences because you cannot see yourself outside the gaze of people who have had the power to make or break you mentally, in your mental health, your emotional health, and even physically. So how are you reclaiming, renaming, and taking ownership of yourself, particularly as it pertains to the history you have with your parents, your father, other significant men in your life, okay? Let us go on. Oh, we're so close. Where are we at Virgo? We got 2 left. Virgo. Oh, my calculative, technical, mechanical friends who 1 + 1 = 2, everything, especially your feelings, especially your desire. And I'm here to tell you that you cannot calculate, equate yourself to happiness. You cannot count your way to joy, and you cannot spreadsheet your way to pleasure. I know that you like for things to make logical sense, and when things don't make logical sense, it can be very hard for you to put them in their proper container. You want things to have a proper container, and guess what? Your body and your feelings don't have containers. Like, yeah, you could take the containers that society has given you and say, oh, this sensation means this. However, Scorpio is constantly challenging us to question, to sometimes even outright reject and rebel against the norms. Just because there are only 2 boxes for race on the paper does not mean that you must identify with one of those. Just because there are only 2 boxes for gender does not mean you have to identify with one of those. The real question becomes, who is the label for? We have labels so that we can be accepted, we can fit in, not stand out too much. We have labels so that we can be identified properly by the people who we want to be in community with. That's a really, just for everybody, that's a really important thing to note about these Taurus Scorpio eclipses generally, but also right now, is that oftentimes we get so caught up on the hamster wheel of seeking validation, of not making other people uncomfortable, of being received, again, because sometimes the consequences are really difficult to deal with. They may be physical violence. They may be, ostracization and rejection. But at the same time, there's a real question about, do you even want or need their validation? And are you still operating in ways that seeks the validation of people who you don't even value, are no longer in relationship or community with, and have no desire to actually have them in your life? That's the peacock. But do you still want validation from these people? Are you behaving in ways that are reacting to a person or a community that you're not even in proximity to for? Who is the label for? Is the label so that you can come into deeper awareness of yourself, or is the label for you to be rightly identified by the people who you do want to be validated and you do want to be received by. I always want to point, while we're in the entirety of this season of eclipses in Taurus and Scorpio, which will last until May 2022, I'm always going to refer you back to the reading that I did for the new moon in Taurus in 2019. That new moon, everything I said in that video is on my YouTube channel. Go back and read it because it's still accurate, still true, still relevant, and evergreen. Do you even want the validation of people that you're bending yourself into a pretzel for? Okay? But Virgo, let me finish up here. Third house is social media, right? So do you have a social media platform? Do you have a space, some real estate online, where you're contending with these identities? Do you have, what about in your family, right? This can be a space where you are really bumping up against the role that you play in your family. Yes, there is father, there is son, there is brother, there is uncle, there is sister, there is cousin, there is aunt, there is grandmother, grandpa, right? All of these labels that give us clear and decisive roles in your family. But what if you are not fitting into those roles? What if you realize that you have been parentified as a child? What does that mean? That means that you have been put in a position where your parent has put you in the role of spouse or forced you to parent yourself in some way. And so this is really about boundaries in your family. This is really about, hey, just because I'm your child does not mean I'm your child. You understand what I'm saying? I got a whole identity separate from the fact that I came out of your woo-ha or, you know, whatever. And so what identities are you shaping that free you from the expectations of roles in your family? Last but not least, we are at Libra. It's all about your money, honey. Ooh, Libra, you know what else you need to watch out for? You need to watch out for your thyroid. You need to watch out for your throat, for your neck, your voice, your esophagus, this whole area of your body, especially for those who have, let's say, if you're like Libra rising, you got Mars in Cancer, or you're Libra rising and you have Mars in, what is that? Pisces, Libra rising and you got Mars in Taurus. You all need to get that little, you feeling, checked out because you might have some thyroid issues going on. That may need surgery, that may need some other kind of hormonal therapy, dietary change, etc., stress management to help you manage your thyroid. Do not overlook that, okay? But for Libra rising moon, we're talking Sidereal or Stellium in Libra. This is about your money. Libra is the sign of principle. Right? It's about the principle. Again, another air sign. This is about objectifying our capabilities. Aries says, I do it because I can, and I will. Okay? Anyone with Mars very prominently placed in their chart can have a little willfulness about them. However, I love it. Somebody said, literally getting a blood draw for my thyroid the day before the full moon. I hope that that works out well for you. And even if it's not some good news, I really do hope that you have access to the care that you need to function and live. All right. But Libra, you know, where Aries is like, I'm doing this because I can, like I have the ability to do it. And so I'm going to do it. Libra's like, I don't really know if I should, right? There are consequences. The ultimate consequences are social consequences. The ultimate reality is our social shared reality and the impact that our choices, actions, and even capabilities have on our community, have on our ability to be in relationship and community with other people. And so Libra can find themselves being a lot more strategic, maybe not reacting in a way that takes things personally, not even being able to necessarily perceive their feelings in some way because they don't have access to them. Remember, all air signs, Libra, Aquarius, Gemini, are dealing with erasure or invisibility. And for Libra, that has to do with you are capable of doing this no matter what somebody else told you. Just because it's been outlawed, you can defend yourself, right? Just because they made a rule against it, you can still do it. You got to weigh the pros and cons in the balance, right? Are you ready to deal with the consequences? And sometimes it's like, yeah, bring it to me, homie. Let's make it do what it do. But ultimately, Libra, this is about your money. This is about your capacity to nourish and feed yourself and to take care of yourself. This is about the difficult survival choices that we make in capitalism. We cannot separate these institutions and systems of power and oppression from our natal birth charts. I know they told you that Cancer was moody, and they said Libra is a serial monogamist, and they said that Leo is obsessed with their hair. But this moment necessitates that we get beyond these tropes and really understand that astrology has the capacity to articulate our liberation if we know where to look. And so when we're talking about Libra rising, for example, yes, we see this in the chart, that you got to make difficult choices for survival in capitalism, right? Can you keep this job? We're seeing a quote labor shortage, which is really just stingy ass corporations refusing to give up the goods, right? Putting the onus on the labor people who need jobs rather than saying, hey, maybe I'm doing something that's making it so that people actually don't want to come work here. Like, you might want to consider that. So Libra, you might find this struggle and this challenge being particularly important for you. And at the end of the day, your own Mars placement is going to tell you the story about what you need to do about your job and financial situation, which brings me back to the 2021 Sidereal Astrology Guide. I really hope that you've gotten this guide. You went to thepeoplesoracle.com and clicked shop. There's a PDF and printed version right there on the shop page as soon as you get there. But what's so important is that I offered a series of questions here to help you interpret your Mars. You need to understand and have a relationship with your Mars because that is what is being triggered, awakened, set off at this moment. Once we get to November, we're going to have a full moon. No, we're going to have is that November? Yeah. Once we get to November, we're going to have a whole lot of stuff going on in Libra, particularly a Mercury retrograde and a new moon in Libra, followed by a full moon eclipse in Taurus. And so in the guide for November, I'm asking similar questions about Venus in your birth chart because that's what's going to be awakened at that time. So right now, whether or not you have been dancing all up in your Mars. And that might simply feel like being triggered. Right? It might simply feel like being triggered. And being triggered means whatever environment that gave you the coping mechanisms that you have now, there are situations and circumstances, relationships and encounters in your life right now that are bringing into remembrance those past situations, whether or not they're actually duplicates of that past situation. And so it triggers you to react in ways that you've had to in order to survive. So I'm going to move on. I'm going to pull some cards. In case you forgot the announcement or missed the announcements, I'm going to give you two announcements. One, everything that I've said into this video, everything that I will say ever in life is always going to be for the sidereal zodiac only. So you need to make sure that you have the proper chart. And the way that you do that is you go to thepeoplesoracle.com, click sidereal birth chart. And there I take you through step by step how to use the website astro.com in order to cast your sidereal birth chart. There are plenty of other websites out there, I'm sure, that can offer you accurate charts. However, they're not paying me. However, astro.com is the one that myself and many other professional astrologers trust. If you have access to astrology software, there's a great app both on Android and iOS, Apple, called Astro Gold. Those are the ones I suggest if you're a PC user and you've got some money to spend. Solar Fire is a great app for you to use. All right, so I'm gonna shuffle these cards and we're gonna get through this reading and we're gonna be done. Second announcement is that Clubhouse is now available on Android, and y'all know I love to run my mouth and I love to give y'all readings. So Wednesday, the day of the actual eclipse, in the evening, I am going to be offering some free sidereal astrology readings or by donation. And you can come and join me at People's Oracle on Clubhouse. And I know it'll be a lot of people up in there, and I do what I can, but I often would like to make it clear that if you are currently on the books for a reading from me, don't be trying to come up on stage and get a reading and taking space from somebody else. If you are a client of mine who has already received a reading from me, don't come up on stage trying to take space from somebody else. If you've been in a Clubhouse room, Instagram, YouTube chat with me, and you've already gotten a reading from me, don't come up in that space trying to take space from other people. I think y'all get the point. Let other people have a chance, okay? I'm only one person. I be trying to spread the love. So let me spread the love. Don't be sabotaging my efforts, all right? Let's see what these cards are saying. This deck that I am using is the Afro Tarot by Jessie Jumanji. Strongly suggest you support a Black artist who is working in the tradition of Pamela Coleman Smith, the original artist for the Rider-Waite Coleman Smith deck. So I'm always about supporting Black creators of tarot because this is ours, okay? Don't be letting them white people try to tell you that tarot is theirs. A Black woman, a queer Black woman created the original artwork for the Rider-Waite Coleman Smith deck, and we got to call it that Coleman Smith so we can honor her properly, okay? So that just be making me feel good because, you know, when you grow up Christian, they be trying to call everything an abomination and act like Black folks wasn't conjuring, working roots and all kind of stuff before we came here, or that even when we came here or there, wherever, that we weren't engaging in practices that were reminiscent of the ones that our mothers and foreparents gave us, okay? All right, let's see here. We've got on the bottom the Empress. Ew, ain't she purty? She's so purty. We've got the Empress here. This is about having access, resourcefulness. I know people like to use the word abundance. That word makes my ear itch, and yeah, I don't like it. Because it's often used in such a capitalist sense and not really recognizing that there are other kinds of more valuable resources, namely relationship. We might look at this Empress as signifying a particular woman in our lives, maybe yourself, maybe your mother or your role of mother. But ultimately, the Empress card for me is a signal about creation and creativity, and it's about access to resources that you need. Even if you don't have it in your own coffers, your own drawer, your own purse or suitcase, you have the capacity to go find it. You have the relationships that give you access to what you need. So let's hold on to that thought about having access, about having resources, and just wealth in the sense of being able to get what you need, even if you don't have it in your pocket right now. All right. What do we have here? The Hermit. I love this deck so much. We've got the Hermit. We've got the Three of Cups. All right. Three of Cups. And we have the Three of Wands. All right. I don't even know what this got to do with the full moon, but that's okay. Normally I can make like an easier connection or like an immediate connection with the cards and this full moon. I will say this actually goes back to a conversation that me and Winter were having last night. Me, Winter, and Reed were talking about Venus and how I just feel like Venus has been done such a disservice. And actually in the Pamela Coleman Smith version of the Empress, I do believe that the planet, the insignia for the planet Venus is in the card. It's not here in this particular version. But I say that to say that I guess through the way we understand European mythology and symbolism, we've come to perceive Venus as really earthy. But I actually think that Venus is very, very, very watery, and it has a much deeper connection to our bodies and our feelings than we've given it credit for. And I would probably be accurate to say that in the Vedic tradition, they definitely give Venus a much more watery, and when I say water, I mean body, physical body, the inner workings and sensation of your physical body being more appropriate to how they understand Venus than the earthy. And while I'm on my soapbox, let's just say that like living in a patriarchal capitalist society, like even the symbols of our oracles have been appropriated, right? I mean, how many times have you seen or heard someone talking about Venus or the Empress and all of a sudden start talking about making money? And it's like, yeah, I know we need money to survive in capitalism or patriarchy. But when it actually comes to resources and the value of resources, human relationship is the most important resource. I've said elsewhere that our society has more and more forced us to put value inside currency instead of each other, right? We're still talking about decolonizing the survival instinct. If you're new here, that's the theme of this year's, the theme of these eclipses, and decolonizing the survival instinct is really about the ways that you've had to conform to capitalism, racism, patriarchy, queerphobia, transphobia, state violence, and occupation of your homelands. The way that you've had to conform to those things in order to survive. And so decolonizing the survival instincts means that you are actually stripping away the veneer of identities that you have embodied and taken on in order to survive. So even the way we understand resourcefulness and creativity has been through the lens of capitalism. What do you have that you enjoy for the sake of just enjoying? Do you have to commodify it? Do you have to put a dollar sign to it? Is it only valid when you can put a money symbol in front of it? Is it only valuable and meaningful and useful to you, right? That capitalism has usurped our joy. It's overtaken our capacity for love. There's a lot of that in these cards, right? If we just take this Empress card to simply mean that you have access to what you need, it's literally right there in front of you, whether or not you need it. You have the capacity to find the resource, to make use of it. You are wealthy in this way, right? And then we see the Hermit. The Hermit is this card. I mean, look at him. He's digging down in the rocks. He's got this fire lighting his way. He's on a mission. The Hermit is searching. They're searching for something. And oftentimes I see the Hermit searching when it's like, close, but that's not quite it, right? There is a deep calling and desire to get in touch with one's path, with what would fulfill you in whatever area of your life. I think when we're talking about the Three of Cups and the Three of Wands, there's definitely a sense of relationship, of love, of community, sisterhood, brotherhood, the fraternal connections, but also just love in general. This particular Empress is definitely bearing fruit, definitely at the point in the growth cycle where the plant has flowered, the seed has broken from its pod, and that space between flowering and fruiting, this is where we are. Things are coming to fruition. In a broader sense, I'm definitely thinking so much about the ways that COVID and the pandemic continue to illuminate for us the ways in which we have abandoned community, the ways that we have abandoned relationship, and the ways that capitalism and patriarchy and racism have all overtaken our capacity to build relationships. How many of us withhold pleasure and joy from ourselves because we feel like we have not reached some externally imposed expectation around ourselves financially, or around our mental health, or around our career, or around even our physical appearance and the standards that society has placed on us? How have we rejected what has been offered to us? How are we not even recognizing what is available to us because we cannot see ourselves free from the lens of patriarchy, free from the lens of racism, free from the lens of capitalism, right? Do you have an identity outside of your salary, outside of the trips you take, outside of, whatever status you perceive yourself to have or not have in society? Can you see yourself? Can you see yourself as worthy? Can you see yourself as deserving? Can you see yourself as already having and being in possession of the thing that it is that you feel like you're not worthy of? There's a lot of opportunity in the Three of Wands around intention. Honestly, this is a really, in general, I would say a positive reading, in that there's a lot of hope. You know, eclipses, this is an eclipse. Full moons illuminate, shine light, make things clear. Eclipses is like somebody coming in and turning the spotlight on you, like, oh shit, I can see that shit now. Woo! Right? Something that was previously maybe invisible to you before is now very, 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 very clear to you. And it can be very jarring. It can be very almost traumatizing to come into awareness of something that has been hidden from you before. It's reality shattering, right? Because you've been telling yourself a particular story about your identity, about what you deserve, about what you're capable of, about what your name should be, about who you come from and who you belong to because of your name. And then when you all of a sudden see yourself free from these identities that have been foisted upon you, it can be very jarring and very alarming, because then you become foreign to yourself and you don't know where to place yourself. You don't know what to do with the old story. This ending on the Three of Wands note, the Three of Wands is about intention. And I know, again, another word that has been co-opted by capitalism. We think of intention in terms of productivity. We think of intention in terms of, let me make my to-do list and set my intentions about what I'm going to accomplish in this world. But if you've been following me for a while, you know that that is not how I see the word intention. I see the word intention not as the desire or goal to achieve something. I see intention as the thing inside of us that we must externalize. This is intangible. It's our very core essence of ourself. It's who we are. And this is the thing that we bring to everything that we do, right? We're leaning into purpose now. Intention and purpose are very tied together for me. And so when I'm talking about intention and purpose, I'm not talking about your to-do list. I'm not talking about your ambitions. I'm not talking about the raise or the salary or the position that you want in your job. I'm not talking about the number of houses or cars you're going to buy. I'm not talking about even how much weight you're going to lose. None of those things are about intention and purpose for me. Intention and purpose for me gets right down to the core of decolonizing the survival instinct, perceiving and embodying yourself so authentically that whatever it is you do, whether you're sweeping the floor or making hit records, this is the self. This is the intention and the sense of purpose that you bring to everything that you do. Your intention and your purpose is not based on your class. It's not based on your race. It's not based on the access to power that you have because you might pass because you got an MBA, or your parents put you in Jack and Jill, or, you know, you're Cuban and you don't look Cuban, you look a little white. And so you've had these opportunities to achieve and get into the upper echelons of power. But understand, none of those things are your intention and none of those things are your purpose. And as a matter of fact, the deeper you get into these institutions of power, the very more difficult it is to stay in touch with that deeper intention and that sense of purpose. And so this full moon eclipse is really about taking stock and inventory, not just of what you possess in terms of access, but really what you possess inside of yourself. Who you are at the core level, when you finally see yourself free from the gaze of people who have said, hey, you better be this, or you better be a little bit more white, you better be a little bit more straight, you're a little bit too feminine for me, you need to toughen up, man up, right? Who are you free from those people's expectations of you? Who are you? Do you know? That's the ultimate resource, because that's what's going to bring you into the community with people who actually see you, who actually validate you. You don't want the validation of people who make you mutilate yourself in order to be accepted by them. You don't want the validation of people who force you to erase yourself just so you can be included. Scorpio dares to be different. The revolution begins in the body, right? It begins with feeling a feeling that makes you really uncomfortable. And it makes you really uncomfortable because you know if certain people in your life knew you felt that feeling, they would come down with the violence. My dad, who's a boomer, always tells me about how him and my uncle, like they used to take dudes in the bathroom and beat their ass if they thought they were gay or if they knew they were gay. I mean, this is a real thing, right? And it's still happening to certain people, right? They're trying to exclude children from sports because they don't conform to the binary of gender. Right? They are trying to litigate and make illegal, fundamentally make women's bodies or people who have uteruses or who can be impregnated, making their bodies ultimately illegal, right? Once you make abortion illegal, what you're really saying is that actually you don't own your own body. You don't get to decide what you do with your own body. I get to decide what you do with your body. I get to decide the moral justification for the choices you make with your own body. And because I think that you making certain choices offends my idea of what power and control is, then I'm just going to take away the choice altogether. And this is not just with abortion. This is with trans youth having access to the therapies and medical help that they need in order to affirm themselves and their identities. This is all under decolonizing the survival instinct, all very clearly relevant at this full moon. I think that's all I have to say. I've given you all so much today. I've talked so long. I would like to shut up now. Just repeating this for everybody. Every time I come on here and do a reading, it's sidereal only. Visit thepeoplesoracle.com, click Sidereal Birth Chart, and make sure you follow the instructions there to cast your sidereal birth chart. Some of the content from today has come from the 2021 Sidereal Astrology Guide. I still have printed and bound versions available, so you can go to thepeoplesoracle.com and click Shop right there on the homepage. You can either download a PDF version or you can pick this out and I will ship it to you. All right. You all enjoy your Sunday, enjoying your week. Don't forget to follow me on Clubhouse and join me for some full moon eclipse readings on Wednesday, May 26th. Deuces!